have with me the many roles at CCG. She's been the director of strategy. She's been a client partner. I prefer to think of her as the queen, captain, and boss of governance. So welcome to the party, Natalie.
Thank you. Hi.
So it's funny, this conversation was titled Gin and Governance, and I had a laugh about that because a fun fact, when I think of gin, I think of it used to be like Nana's drink. It was what my grandmother drank when I was a kid that I thought smelled like Pine Sol. And recently, in 2018, actually, it was the largest growing beverage category. And so I had a laugh when I thought about governance. And I thought, governance used to be the drink of IT only. And now it's become a very popular drink across the entire business. And I think that was even pre-COVID. So in your experience and all the client experience that you have, why is governance gaining traction right now?
Yeah. So I would say in the last probably year and a half, we are hearing more and more about governance, and mostly it's because of this new concept of data privacy. So folks are starting to get very serious about how, and frankly, there's laws around it, how you're going to manage personal information. From a retail perspective in Europe, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations came out, and that was a big deal for companies that were not prepared for that. There were global organizations like Starbucks is a good example, where if they had to kind of get their ducks in a row as it relates to managing and tracking customer data, so that in the event that they were a customer asked to opt out or wanted their data to be deleted from the systems, they have a systematic way to do that. There's a lot of cost associated with not having those controls in place. I wrote down the number here. So compliance costs projected for GDPR regulations are projected at $55 billion. So you can imagine what companies are trying to do now to scramble to get in line and start to make sure their systems and their data are protected and that they can react as they need to. And it's not just GDPR. So that's European. And if you're a retailer or an organization that's housing European data, customer data, but it's also now in California with the CCPA. Washington's about to drop a new law. Florida's drafting one right now. It's in legislation for approval. And so we have all these different states that are taking a different approach to how they want to manage and regulate customer or personal identifiable data. And so companies are going to have to respond to that, and they're going to have to create that logic to really account for that and make sure that they're taking it seriously, or there's going to be a lot of cost associated with it.
And just when data was getting so easy to manage across all of your source systems, adding in compliance and government regulation is what everyone's dreaming for, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we've moved into this COVID area, and it's really highlighted the resiliency and the risk that can come about in new situations. So as these last couple months have progressed, and I know you've been extremely busy over these last couple months, what kind of conversations are you having, and what are people concerned about right now?
Yeah. So a lot of the clients that are reaching out to us, both current and prospective clients, are really worried right now about the remote workforce and the fact that they weren't always enabled to have all of their employees work remote. While most companies had, a handful of folks that had the capability and availability to do that, there were a lot of organizations that simply just never was something that they considered. So, all of a sudden overnight, the federal government said, we've got to go into this lockdown, and companies had to very quickly go into their assets and start to pull up laptops and prepare them to send home with people that in the past had never had to do that. So there's no controls in place. This is a last minute thing that they're trying to scramble to just get the technology in workers' hands so that they can actually get them home and able to take action and do their day jobs. But things that weren't considered because it was so last minute were the controls around that. So what does that mean to the company and how we're securing and protecting our data and our assets? So in the past, if you're an employee that's never had a laptop that left the building and you were always a desktop user, all of a sudden you've been called to the office to pick up your laptop, you're taking it home, and you may not know what you're allowed to do or not to do with that laptop. A good example I heard on one of our last forums is, we sent all these folks home with these laptops. Actually, it was Lee Crump at Rollins that mentioned it. And he said, we didn't have any controls in place for how to update their security patches because they're not on the network. So we had to scramble to figure that out. We didn't have documentation or planning around that. And so they were scrambling to do that. Other folks that have called me and said, hey, I need you to look at my data usage policy because I'm not sure that I'm covered when these assets are leaving the company and that my employees are even aware of what they can and cannot do with those assets and with the data that's stored on those assets.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, things like, and people just, you don't always think about this, but things like don't leave your computer in a hot car. Not only is it bad for the computer, but it could be stolen, and that's theft. You have an issue where your data and all the information on that computer could be easily stolen if someone accesses that machine. The other example is I'm working from a kitchen table right now, and so if I don't know that the company policy is I need to control, alt delete, lock my machine every time I walk away from it, I've got these home offices where people could potentially be coming in and out, and they can access any data that I have access to if I haven't locked that machine. Those are just policies that typically you would have in place, but not at this level where we're at now, where everybody across the organization needs to understand what it means to be a good data citizen and what you have to do to protect yourself and the company from theft of information.
Mm-hmm. And so much of that ties in as we talk about CCPA and GDPR. There's obviously some very nuanced components to that of being forgotten and some of the other components, but just with data privacy, especially in what we do and helping folks with analytics and helping folks with reporting, it's so often that folks like to print things out, right? So they create these reports, they print information out, they carry the report with them. As airports are opening back up, I'm in the airport, I have my report, I leave it on the table, walk away. Some of these things can be pretty critical. And so what's the first step for those folks as they're trying to get a handle around risk and resiliency? What is the guidance that you're giving them?
Yeah, so right now I'm working with 3 different clients on updating their policies. So what we're doing is we're doing a high-level assessment of their existing policies as it relates to data. So data assets, data management of those assets, data usage policies, remote workforce policies, general data citizenship policies, and we're going to get those updated, and we're going to make sure that they include information about potentially having this information leave the office, the building, when in the past it had not. And so we're doing those assessments now. We're going to help them rewrite those policies. We're working with their legal team to understand what are some of the changes that we need to be considering, because we're not lawyers. There's a limit to what we're aware of and what's coming from the top down, from the government down, in terms of what needs to be considered. But that is probably the biggest thing right now, is let's just make sure at minimum, you can't control everything. If an employee truly wants to do something wrong with the data, or they want to be insubordinate, they're going to do that. I could literally take a picture of a screen shot right now and blast it on social media with somebody's personal data. I can't stop all of those kind of things, but I can have a policy, and I can at least attempt as a company to protect myself by saying, this is our rule of law at this company, and if you break that, and we prove that you weren't adhering to these policies through auditing and systematic checking, you may not have a job with us. This is very serious. So that's step 1, for sure. Step 2 is going to be the systematic controls, getting those put in place.
And how as clients are putting policies in place and they're educating folks on what this new normal is, so as they come out of that reaction mode and they start to put this in place, what are thoughts on training? Are they ready for training? Are they ready to train their remote workforce, or is this also a gap that they're concerned about?
Oh yeah, no, it's a big gap. I was thinking back to when SOX was a big deal. I think it was now probably 15 years ago, which is really aging me, maybe longer, but I was working at Ford Motor Company at the time, and we had to go through rigorous training at every single employee every 3 months to understand what it meant to the company, to us, what we can and cannot do with the data. And so we had to hunker down. They had to, have their learning department put together modules. The employees had to take the time to take the test. We had to measure adherence and make sure that it was happening, and managers had to address anybody that was either not taking the training and certifying that they took the training or adhering to it. I mean, it was a thing. I think that's what's going to happen next. I don't think there's any way to avoid this. We we have to protect ourselves, we have to protect our employees, we have to protect our customers and their data and information. We have to be good data citizens. So this concept of ongoing training, repeated training, certification, if you want to call it, that says, hey, I took the training, I understand it, I took a little quiz, I'm good, I'm certified for the next 3 months is great. But we have to do that on a regular basis and continue to remind people, especially as those policies continue to change, what that means to them and what they should and should not be doing.
Absolutely. Great advice. And so, I teased out in the beginning, kind of with a poor analogy between gin and governance, but I teased out that governance was historically driven by IT, and that IT was of the governing mindset. And I think managing risk and protecting the business systematically is something that's very natural for IT. So let's shift into, from a business standpoint, we know that we're seeing a lot of folks now talking about governance for growth. And they're talking about governance for communication and for capabilities in accelerating and really enabling a lot of the work that we're helping them with around data, around analytics, et cetera. So kind of switch lanes a little bit and talk about where this is not just about risk and resiliency, but where it can really be a catalyst for growth.
Yeah. So there's also a large opportunity here for efficiencies, and that's always been the case with governance. It's always taken a backseat to every other project or every other shiny object that's happening in the workforce. But the reality is, with governance and with metadata management and having your processes and procedures documented, you can reduce a lot of the swirl that you have around things like, we're talking data and analytics, around data quality issues or concerns and questions that you may be getting about the data that you're receiving in a report that you're trying to consume and maybe you don't understand. We've been trying for years to get organizations to take steps and to be more proactive in providing that level of metadata. Well, here we are, COVID, everyone's working from home. I can't just tap someone on the shoulder next to me and ask a question about a metric that I'm pulling from a database. I have to actually coordinate that now. I have to either set up a call or a webinar or some other way to have a discussion. It's really time consuming. Whereas in the past, truly, you could just walk to another cube and have the conversation. That's gone. So now the need for having that documentation it's a must have. And I have companies reaching out to me saying, oh my God, do I need a metadata technology tool? Do I just need to put some processes and procedures in place? Or do I just need people putting their head down and documenting their roles? And I'm saying it's a little bit of everything, because you are behind the 8 ball in this, and we do need to catch up so that your remote workforce can be as effective as they would be if they were in the office. We need to enable them.
I think it's such a fascinating piece, and anyone who's worked with data from either side of the table, or from any side of the table, it is now a language, and it is a different language. And as someone who's often going into organizations who are immature around data, we have to be able to translate to them what we're talking about and what this new way of communicating is. And I know I've often heard you talk about data literacy and that part of it. So is data literacy a part of data governance in your mind, and how does that play into kind of the policies, procedures, and what you're talking about?
No, it absolutely is. It's actually in the CCG methodology that we use for measuring and assessing organizations with data governance. We consider data literacy a big component of that. If people don't understand what governance is and how to use data and how to not use data, they're going to struggle. So the whole intent with that is to raise data literacy across the organization, provide that level of training and input so that they understand not only why it's important and buy into data governance and help support it, but also so they can do their jobs and be more efficient and make better decisions with the data that they're seeing because they're more confident in what they're viewing. So this has been a huge topic in the last couple of weeks. I've got a client right now talking to me about, I need to do more training around a certain subject area, because in the past these folks all sat in the same space and they were able to just work together in tandem to create reports in an ad hoc fashion, and that's no longer the case. And they're really inefficient right now because of lack of documentation and just lack of general understanding of the data across the different folks. Because when you had everyone in the same space, you could have a SME on finance, a SME in marketing, a SME in whatever data subject domain that they're SME of, and they can share that information just sitting in a room, but they're no longer sitting in that room. And so now you have to know a little bit about everything in order to create the metrics that you need to do your job. It's definitely changing.
It's actually something I'm probably one of the people that you shunned in your past because I was the guy saying 10 years ago, we'll get to the governance in a minute. But what's fascinating about it now, about the story that we're creating with our clients is everyone has heard the analogy that we used to spend 80% of our time getting the data together and only 20% of the time doing the insights. And we can shift that now. We have proven methodologies to shift that. But now we're creating, there's so many insights and there's so much happening that I still have to be able to communicate what I'm doing. And I have to be able to communicate complex things with AI or with ML that we're putting in place. And I have to find a way to explain that. And now if I'm spending 80% of my time explaining all the insights and only 20% of the time being able to do the insights, we're just creating new challenges. And so it's almost the Rosetta Stone of data. We need to have people learning and training themselves so that we can speak that common language. It's easier with tech than it is with people, but if we truly want the empowerment, which is the ultimate goal, is to empower these employees with the results and the insights we're creating, we can't do it if they're not speaking the same language. And I think it's a fascinating part of governance, and I think it's going to be one of our biggest focus areas for our clients as we go forward.
Absolutely. Dan, real quick on that topic, I mean, you bring up a really good point, because one of the other things that I'm hearing from clients right now, oh, hi, I see Jason joined. Hi, Jason. One of the other things, you gotta love virtual meetings. One of the other things I'm hearing from clients is, I feel like ever since the workforce went remote, IT is getting, especially the BI department's getting inundated with calls about data quality issues. I'm looking at a report and it's not right. I'm in finance, I know my numbers, it's not right. And they're really frustrated and they're feeling like, what is happening? Are people really creating reports that are wrong? What in reality, as we're starting to dig into some of these things, that's not the case. What it is, it's a perception that the data is wrong, simply because there was no metadata on that report to explain the source, the author, the timestamp, the date it was run. All those metrics and facts that are going to help you understand what you're consuming are not on there, because again, we're so behind with governance and metadata management and enforcing that as part of a distribution of any report or a dashboard that goes out, that now it's really starting to hit the fan, if you will. I mean, the IT department's about had it with taking calls, because they'll do the due diligence, they'll go back and they'll review the analytics and they'll say, it's right, the data's not wrong. It might be wrong based on how you thought they pulled it, but it's right based on how we pulled it. So that's just been an interesting dynamic I've seen as well.
Absolutely. I think it's incredible insight. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for all your insight, for helping us understand the value of governance pre-COVID and then kind of the different conversations we're having with COVID. Always fascinating. And I do think this is a critical catalyst as we look to continue to help organizations adapt and grow with data.